Some of the science, George, is so new it hasn't made it into the textbooks yet. And many of the discoveries are validating some of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. The results suggested that everything is separate from everything else. If there's nothing filling the empty space, in lay terms, it suggests that everything is separate from everything else. And for that reason, what happens in point A has no effect on what happens in point B. If it looks like it does, it's only a coincidence. And we have an entire civilization now built upon the belief that what we do in one place doesn't have an effect or doesn't make any difference on something that's happening somewhere else. And that false assumption has written us, humankind, right out of the equations of the universe and how things work, and it's been the stumbling block for what we're calling this unified field theory that is yet to come together. There's some promising foundations out there, like string theory, superstring theory, that have been around since the 80s, but we've got to ask if these theories are the right path, if they're putting us on the right path, and they've been around for 20-plus years with the best minds of our time working on them and the best computing power we've ever had. Why are they still theories? Why have they failed to unify the forces of nature and provide a single story that explains the way the universe works and our role in the universe? And this is where everything's changing, George. This is why it's so exciting to be able to share this information tonight.
Could this also be the fact that there is this wireless internet out there in the universe or the multiverse that seems to connect everything?
I think that's precisely what I think is happening, George. It's so interesting. We talk about the great challenges of our time in history on the one hand. On the other hand, the inability of science to solve some of our problems. I tend to look at the big picture, and what I see happening is the very conditions that we've created, that science has created in our world, the conditions of disease and energy consumption, the possibility and threat of global war. Those very conditions are now driving us to understand who we are to survive the conditions that we've created. And I think what is so incredible about this time in history is this is when we get to find out what's real and what's not, what works and what doesn't. You know, we've heard from the mid-1980s and the harmonic convergence that we're all one, we're part of our world, and that we have powers beyond our most amazing dreams, and people would like to believe that.
You know, Greg, we might not have enough time to figure that. We won't have the time to make the mistake to figure it out. I think the clock has really ticked beyond where we should be.
Well, I agree with you, George, that the clock is ticking very quickly. I'm going to share tonight there is a global project that has just come online early in this year, the 2008, that I'm going to be able to talk about tonight, that allows every one of our listeners to participate in not just watch, not just observe, and not just guess as to whether or not they're having an effect, but to know that they're literally having an effect upon the fields of the earth, upon fields that are called coherent fields of the earth, that affect everything from the peace between nations to the health of our bodies to our sleep patterns to our relationships. I'm very excited to be sharing this information tonight. So we're going to cover a lot of ground over these next couple of hours.
And is it our ability to tap into this that changes these things for the better for us?
Well, yes. The fact is that we all already tap into it. The key is to do so consistently, predictably, and in a way that allows us to create the conditions in our lives that we're choosing to help us to become better people and have a better world. That's the bottom line to this ancient traditions that I'll be talking about that we found practiced in the monasteries and in the mountains of Egypt and the highlands of central China and Tibet. And now our own science is bearing out the very principles that have been preserved in these ancient wisdom traditions in non-scientific ways. So we walk into a monastery in the highlands of central China, and the monks aren't talking about quantum fields and holographic, experiences. What they do is they giggle, because to them this is so basic. They giggle and they say, this is the way you work and this is the way your world works. And when we marry the wisdom that's been preserved in some of these remote and pristine, magnificent temples and monasteries and in some of the hardest to get to parts of the world. We marry what's been preserved there with what the best science of our time is now telling us. What I believe we're finding, we're building for ourselves a spiritually based science that for some people sounds like an oxymoron, but I believe that this spiritually based science will meet the challenges that we're talking about tonight. And George, while I agree the clock is ticking, what we're finding is that the changes happen so quickly. I think we've got all the time we need, and now is the time to make the choices.
Now, Greg, these false assumptions of science that you talk about the space between things, sure, and also that our inner experiences have no effect on whatever happens. Both of these, of course, you're saying are false assumptions. I agree. How did we get to the point to understand that they're false assumptions? How did we know they were wrong?
Well, this is what's so interesting. It's like the great secret that everybody knows except us, George. And when you leave Western culture, what I've found, and my first journey into the Egyptian mountains was in the mid-1980s, and what I found was that the people that were preserving this wisdom now, their traditions, some of them 5, 6, 7,000 years old, they begin with the place where our 300-year-old science has only arrived. In other words, science has spent 300 years debating whether or not there's a field of an essence that connects everything, and now they're just arriving at the place where scientists say, okay, the field's there, what do we do with it? And this is the place where these ancient traditions began, and they have spent 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years learning how to apply this in their lives. So for me, this is the value of going into a living culture, because I'm not interpreting the hieroglyphs on an ancient temple wall. I'm speaking to another human, eye to eye, heart to heart, man to man, or woman to woman, and I'm asking them, usually through a translator, I'm asking them, when you just did this miraculous thing that I saw, when you levitated off the floor, or when you created this healing in the body of another person, how did you do it? What did you do inside your body that created that effect? And if I don't understand,
do they know?
They do know. And if I don't understand what the answer is, I can ask them again and again until they either answer me or they get frustrated and ask me to leave the monastery. But they do know, and they're amazed that we do not, George. And this is why it's called the great secret. Everybody knows except us. Now, our own scientists have rediscovered the existence of this field. And for some of our listeners that would like to believe that this is true and maybe have never heard this, it's been published in mainstream journals. One of the most amazing was the journal Nature. A gentleman named Silvertooth reproduced the Michael Morley.
Silvertooth?
Silvertooth is his name. Yeah. Reproduced the experiments in 1986, the same experiments that Michelson Morley did back in 1887, and it's in the journal Nature for people that know. It's a very prestigious journal.
Sure is.
Volume 322, August 1986, page 590. Silvertooth, under the auspices of the United States Air Force, reproduced the nearly 100-year-old experiments done by Michelson and Morley. The results of his experiment showed that there is, in fact, a field of energy that connects everything in our world, and the field was found to exist within the same parameters predicted 100 years earlier by Michelson Morley. So this should have made the cover of CNN and Time magazine, but people just aren't talking about it much.
Why not, Greg?
I think what I've found. And then I'll explain what I found, and then I'll explain why this may not be important. There is a reluctance in much of the mainstream science to accept what this means, because it changes everything, George. Entire careers, textbooks, ways of thinking have to be reevaluated if we know that this field is out there, on the one hand. But on the other hand, if we're waiting for science to acknowledge in the textbooks what we already know in our ancient and spiritual traditions and what the experiments are already showing us, we might wait another 10 years. But the beauty of what we're going to share tonight is that we don't have to wait for it to be acknowledged in the textbooks to apply it in our lives and in our world in a meaningful way.